I was musing this morning. I was thinking, what kind of President Schulz are we going to get? Are we going to get a dignified, calm, a figure that behaves like the Speaker of all great parliaments around the world, somebody who puts himself above politics and the nitty-gritty of the day-to-day arguments and is an ambassador, indeed a statesman? Or are we going to get the Martin Schulz we've got to know since 2004 as leader of the Socialist Group? You know the one I mean: snarling, angry, unable to control his temper, intolerant of anybody with an alternative point of view, somebody who is contemptuous when in free referendums people have the temerity to vote no, somebody who is anti-British to his fingertips and doesn't like free markets. I was wondering which one would we get. Well, your opening speech has settled that question for me, and it's pretty clear. We're going to have 2.5 years of political fanaticism from the chair.
The country that actually invented democracy, which is you guys, have now, and you should be very proud of that too, the country that invented democracy now finds itself, I'm afraid, reduced to a state where your Prime Minister, Papandreou, was effectively removed and replaced by a placeman, and where the Troika arrive in Athens and tell your current government what they may or may not do. That is, frankly, in democratic terms, humiliating, and so it is no wonder that people take to the streets. And I've said myself, if I was a Greek citizen, I would take to the streets, because the whole point about democracy, and the reason democracy works, is that it acts as a safety valve. Even if you hate the government of the day, you resolve at the next election to get rid of them and to replace them with somebody else. And it's why democracy is so precious and so important. But if people feel that right has been removed from them because the power has gone somewhere else, then I'm afraid all they're left with is civil disobedience. So that worries me too. But the economics of Greece's current predicament worry me almost as much.
And Mr Barroso here at the G20, when he stood up at the press conference and said, "We don't need any lessons in democracy," said the unelected President of the European Commission. I mean, you went on to say that the Eurozone's problems had been caused by unorthodox practices in North America. You've made yourselves an international laughingstock. You don't have any credibility, but one piece of helpful advice from me: don't this summer go on any billionaires' yachts on extended holidays. And I thought, well, having listened to him over the previous couple of weeks telling us there wouldn't be a bailout, I've got the feeling after all his twists and turns he's just about the most incompetent leader in the whole of Europe. And that's saying something, because there's pretty stiff competition. Indeed, every single prediction of yours, Mr Barroso, has been wrong. And dear old Herman Van Rompuy, well, he's done a runner, hasn't he? Because the last time he was here, he told us we'd turned the corner, that the euro crisis was over, and he hasn't bothered to come back and see us. You know, I remember being here 10 years ago and hearing the launch of the Lisbon Agenda. We were told that with the euro by 2010 we would have full employment, and indeed that Europe would be the competitive and dynamic powerhouse of the world. By any objective criteria, the euro has failed, and in fact there is a looming impending disaster. You know, this deal makes things worse, not better. 100 billion is put up for the Spanish banking system, and 20% of that money has to come from Italy. And under the deal, the Italians have to lend to the Spanish banks at 3%, but to get that money, they have to borrow on the markets at 7%. It's genius, isn't it? It really is brilliant. So what we're doing with this package is we're actually driving countries like Italy towards needing to be bailed out themselves. In addition to that, we put a further 10% on Spanish national debt. And I tell you, any banking analyst will tell you 100 billion doesn't solve the Spanish problem. It would need to be more like 400 billion. And with Greece teetering on the edge of euro withdrawal, the real elephant in the room is that once Greece leaves, the ECB, the European Central Bank, is bust. It's gone. It has 444 billion euros worth of exposure to the bailed out countries. And to rectify that, you'll need to have a cash call from Ireland, Spain, Portugal, Greece and Italy. You couldn't make it up, could you? It is total and utter failure. This ship, the Euro Titanic, has now hit the iceberg, and sadly there simply aren't enough lifeboats.
Nigel, and talking of Noddyland, the UK, you think, should be out of the European Union. What would that do to trade? Would it be more expensive for the UK to actually do business with the remaining European countries? I mean, what's the benefit? What's the UK getting out of it?
Well, what's really interesting is that the UK now trades with the EU at a massive, massive deficit. 2010 is the last year for which we have figures, and European companies sold to us £50 billion worth of goods more than we sold to them. So, the idea that Mercedes would not sell their cars in Britain if we left the EU, or that my favourite Spanish Rioja producer would refuse to sell me a case of red wine, frankly, is ludicrous. But what it would do for us is it would open up our ability to have trade deals, free trade deals in particular, with the rest of the world. And there is a very big English-speaking world out there, and we've turned our backs on it, which is madness.
The story goes, and Mr Cameron's story and Mr Barroso's story and most people here's story is that the euro is something that needs to be saved, and therefore the more money we throw at it, the more guarantees we put behind it, that's a good thing, because the break-up of the eurozone would be a very difficult and perhaps perilous course to go down. I'm afraid that there is a problem with this, that nothing that is being done, whether it's the banking union or the fiscal union, does a single thing to change the problem that there is a massive competitive gap between the German economy and the Mediterranean economies, and if we carry on down this route of saving the euro, we will finish up in those southern Mediterranean states probably with violent revolution. And so I would say it is better, if we were good Europeans, we would break up the eurozone and recognise that Greece, Spain and Portugal should never have joined in the first place.
Question to Mr Farage. The election of a Prime Minister in the UK, is there a good debate, or is it just a question of somebody going and kissing the ring of the Queen?
I better be slightly careful how I answer the last part of that question, I think. Mr Bruck, the British Prime Minister is taken from the floor of the House of Commons, and in fact nearly the entire British government are elected members of the floor of that House of Commons, and that is the government of the United Kingdom. The fundamental difference between that and the European Union is this College of Commissioners that you see over here, the people who have the sole right to propose legislation within the European system. Not one of them has been voted for by anybody in Europe, and therefore they cannot be removed, and that is why the European system isn't just undemocratic, it is anti-democratic. And we got nearly 1 million people voting for us in 2010, but it was just 3% of the vote. But something really rather radical has changed, because the opinion polls now have us on 9%. Some of them have us on 10%. One the other day had us on 12%. This is a very, very big change, and I congratulate all of you for making it happen. Why is it happening? Well, partly I think that we're quite lucky with our enemies. It could be Mr Clegg and tuition fees. It could be the Prime Minister and his cast iron guarantees. We could be lucky with Miliband, who doesn't seem to want to say anything about anything at all. We could be lucky, but actually it's not about the individuals. That isn't why people are turning to UKIP. People are turning to UKIP because they look at the three old parties, they look the same, they sound the same, and many of us now have the impression that this country is run by a bunch of college kids on work experience.
Welcome to Mr. RPA.
People are coming to us and joining us and supporting us. People support UKIP not just because of where we stand on the European Union. They support us because they see us now as the voice of opposition in British politics on a broad range of issues. That is why we're up in the polls. And with every one of your predictions, it goes on getting worse. I'm sorry, sir, you don't have the presence, the credibility or the standing for the international markets to believe that you can provide a solution. Well, I was in Strasbourg last week, where Mr Barroso fired the opening shot. They're not hiding anymore. They're not pretending anymore. They've used the euro crisis to try and take yet more power for themselves. Mr Barroso, for the first time ever in all my years in the Parliament, used the F word. It's out of the bag. It is going to be a federal Europe. And he was joined within 48 hours by my very good friend, Herman Van Rompuy. And, well, they haven't fined me for a bit, have they? And now 11 foreign ministers have put out a report, and what we're seeing is a draft treaty. We're seeing a treaty that, by Barroso's own admission, will turn the EU into a global power. Mr Barroso is arguing for a stronger army. He's arguing for more overseas military intervention. They are designing the treaty in such a way that they intend for there never to be any more referendums on this EU question. They will, in the treaty, propose a European Union treasury and budgets to be set at a European level. And on the issue of democracy, Mr Barroso says we must transfer our national democracy to a model of European democracy, by which he guesses we must give up parliamentary democracy for all time to the unelected European Commission.
These are very, very bad, dangerous people. They're the worst people we've seen in Europe since 1945.
So what do you think of this claim that it's the fault of the United States, the problems that Europe has?
Well, remember, this bloke's an idiot. I mean, a real, complete idiot. And I and I forgot to tell you, he's also a communist, because when he was a student,
it's a twofer.
He was actually a supporter. No, I'm not joking. He was a supporter of Chairman Mao, which is just about the most extreme form of communism that exists. So the guy is a deluded idiot. I do my best in the European Parliament to try and point this out to the world, but he, in this very short little statement, has now proved everything I've been saying about him for the last 8 or 9 years to be completely true.
He said that UKIP and other parties like UKIP were now irrelevant to the EU debate. Well, Mr Barroso, it is UKIP's intentions to make you eat those words.
He is a UK politician with a US following and a Eurosceptic party that has seen its support grow, moving it from the fringe to a position of being a viable mainstream alternative. He's known for not mincing his words. UKIP leader and MEP Nigel Farage is here in our studio today for a sit-down. Let's just start with you. Every time you give a speech on the floor of Parliament, when you come on this show and do an interview, it goes viral in the financial blogosphere here in the US. Why do you think your message resonates so much here in America?
Well, the global markets are all interconnected. You know, what happens particularly in New York and Chicago is totally linked in to what is happening in the Eurozone. And the Eurozone crisis is hanging heavily across the whole of the financial and investment community of the world. So people are really interested to hear what's going on. And what they get from Mr Barroso and Van Rompuy and all the other ghastly people in Brussels that no one's ever voted for, what they get is this diet of, there's no problem, chaps, we're going to have a summit next Thursday, it'll all be sorted out. Well, there have been 21 summits over the last 2 years, and here we are today with Cyprus on the verge of needing a bailout, the Spanish position, frankly, looking perilous, And I think the reason my stuff goes viral is that I'm giving not just a counter-argument, but I think and I believe and I hope a pragmatic economic alternative.
We said from day one that the Eurozone could not and would not work. We've said since the party first came into existence that the European Union would turn itself into a militarised, undemocratic danger to global peace. We've predicted these things, and I think the British public, and indeed the public now over much of Europe, are beginning to see that we were right. Maybe the Finns will say they've had enough. Maybe the Germans, as a country, will say we no longer are going to go on feeling ashamed and guilty of what our grandparents' generation did, and will start to stand up for our own economic interest. I don't know, but I suspect that the best hope we've got actually comes from the United Kingdom, where now the demand for a referendum is stronger than it's ever been, where a Conservative Prime Minister is in very deep trouble. And I think, Mr Barroso, today, the British people hearing you calling for the European Union to become a global power, making it absolutely clear that Member States must obey what you tell them, whether they're in the relatively wealthy north or the poorer south. I think those comments, this emerging, creeping Euro dictatorship, is something that will repulse millions of British people, and the only good news I take from today is you've helped to bring that referendum just a little bit closer. Oh, and of course what they won't tell you is that what their new referendum intends you to vote for is staying within a system where the European courts are still supreme over the British courts, and where the British taxpayer has to go on paying over £50 million a day to be a member of that union. That is not the referendum, ladies and gentlemen, that we in UKIP want. We in UKIP demand that this country is given a full, free and fair choice in a referendum so that we can decide who governs Britain. And increasingly, Britain looks like a square peg in a round hole. You see, we didn't join the Eurozone. And that means that every time you have one of your summits in Brussels, when the big debates are going on, there is actually nothing for the British Prime Minister to say. And in fact, if we do say anything, we're now seen as the dog in the manger. The fact is, Chancellor, you are leading the Eurozone on a journey to a much more deeply centralised and I think more fundamentally undemocratic Europe. But nonetheless, we simply can't join you on that journey. Whether it is harmonisation of financial market regulations, as you said today, whether it's the financial transaction tax, whether it's the banking union, Cameron is forced into the position, time and time again, where there is nothing he can say other than no. Because British public opinion, and now as the Labour Party appears to have discovered a bit of Euroscepticism, or at least a bit of opposition, he cannot join these conversations. Now I sense in Brussels, not from you, but certainly around this chamber, an increasing growing hostility to the United Kingdom's membership of this union, and indeed there are many here that blame the Anglo-Saxon markets in London and New York for the faults of the Eurozone. Wouldn't it be better, Chancellor, tonight, if you went to Downing Street and said to Mr Cameron, look, this simply doesn't work anymore, it really is time that the United Kingdom left the European Union. He hasn't got the courage to say it himself, but if you said it to him, it might have an impact. I mean, all I'm suggesting, Chancellor, is that we have a simple, amicable divorce, and then we'll all get on much better in the future.
Thank you.
And I think we will be in the driving seat for those European elections. I believe it must be UKIP's aim and goal to win those European elections in 2014, to cause an earthquake in British politics and to change the future of this country forever. And as long as I'm your leader, I promise you I will work night and day for us to achieve that goal. Thank you.
Welcome to Internet.da.